The Western propaganda machine is very well oiled.
It is. That is very true. The time is overly ripe to tackle some major myths that have spread pretty far and wide across the Western zeitgeist. Pretty much anybody who listens to not just mainstream media, but even many alternative media, good-intentioned alternative media platforms have all fallen prey to certain common mythologies that treat the center of all evil in this world, the thing that we should all learn to hate and fear as the cause of all of our problems and the precarious future that we're being pushed into, is China, the Communist Party of China. And there's various variations on this from the, both a more corporate media consumer mindset, both for Democrats as well as Republicans, liberals, conservatives, as well as alternative media consumers. There's different narratives, different spins that are really working hard with a certain amount of sophistication that have been utilizing similar techniques that were applied and crafted during the Cold War, the age of nuclear, mutual assured nuclear annihilation, that traumatized so many people, baby boomers and slightly younger baby boomers, around, certain spells, certain charms, certain arguments that have portrayed the great villains as China and to a certain degree Russia. So typically if people are of a liberal leaning, then the narratives that have been crafted for them portray Russia as the harbinger of all evil. And if they're slightly more conservative leaning folk out there, then the narratives have been sort of spun to portray Russia's key ally, China, as the harbinger of all evil. But in either case, what's being missed and the lack of focus and confusion is that the real hand of our problems and the actual conspiratorial agencies that are trying to manage us into a great reset and a depopulated world order under a one world government are directly tied to the same hereditary caste systems, hereditary structures of power that have been there for many generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years, that the American founding fathers, recognized as the key opposition to establishing a different form of government founded upon natural law and the consent of the governed. And every great leader in different parts of the world at different times who arose, and usually you know them by the fact that they get assassinated and don't live through their presidencies or their terms as leaders, you could usually get a sense of that they're doing something in opposition to this other thing, this parasite. They were aware. They were much more aware, and that this is there. So today, again, there's so much confusion. I thought you and I were talking about really just tackling the China question head on and just debunking some myths.
This is not a conversation about why communism is great. This is not in support of the Chinese Communist Party necessarily. This is not about moving to China because it's somehow better than where we currently live. This is about analyzing Western propaganda.
Simple as that.
Right.
Agreed.
With that out of the way.
So, as a some remarks just on my end to situate this, my wife and I just produced an 80-page dossier called "Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops: How the Cold War is Being Revived and What You Can Do About It." It looks like this. Cynthia Chung is my wife and co-author. She herself is the author of several books and has been a writer for Strategic Culture and the president of the Rising Tide Foundation, which we set up in Montreal in 2019. It's got about 9 different chapters tackling 9 different angles of major sacred cow myths that have been cooked up. And many of these myths you'll find at the root have CIA MI6 creative writers behind them. And we just debunk it. And we go through a lot of history. One of the things that we do is, there's many things. But I think getting to your question of the past, what's shaping the current president, which is obviously the past, there's something interesting. I recently wrote this article called "An Earth Day Special in Defense of Climate Science and CO2." Part of what I do in the original introduction is I introduce something that many of your viewers probably have heard about called Climategate. Have you heard about Climategate, Jerm?
Yes, about 2010, more or less.
Yeah, this is in 2009, at the end of 2009, in the weeks leading up to the COP14 summit in Copenhagen. There was a major momentum amidst the economic collapse, amidst an avian flu, right, that was circulated as well as part of a potential global pandemic. There was this acceleration towards what was promised to be the first time a global governing mechanism, a new set of mechanisms would be created that would be above nation states to impose carbon elimination quotas onto the nations of the world as part of this acceleration towards decarbonization and reducing the global warming down to like 1.5 degrees, as if that has anything to do with science or anything to do with carbon dioxide emissions. But the point being is it failed. You know, Obama, Merkel, Sarkozy, many other Western puppets were all convened for 3 days. And in this article, I demonstrate how this failed. Part of it involved East Anglia University, which saw a leak of a lot of their climate data that was exposed, demonstrating that they've been lying on their climate models to make it seem as though things were getting warmer when in fact there was no correlation in a serious way between carbon dioxide caused by humans and climate change. And you had the actual emails from various officials high up at East Anglia who were basically admitting to that. So that was one aspect. The other reason why this world government program failed is that you had China and China and India, who basically locked their delegations in a room and didn't come out, didn't participate, didn't sign on to any carbon restrictions, and didn't allow for any world government programs to go online. So that bought us some time in many ways. And this is a good paradox for people who are today freaked out about one world government, the attack against industrial civilization, utilizing the cover of demonizing carbon dioxide, which is otherwise known as a plant food. And the fact that the reason why this didn't work was because China and India, with the help of some Russians and some Africans around Sudan at the time, sabotaged it from within. And, some courageous people, it seems, from Britain itself possibly leaked something from within. So that's the first thing. As far as recent history, so to say that China right there is the supervillain promoting world government to disrupt nation states, which is what a lot of people have tended to fall into, creates a paradox. If you believe that, then how do you explain away what they did in 2009 to save the sovereign nation state system? This also resulted in George Soros coming out saying China is not really playing ball in an interview with Chrystia Freeland. And in it, he basically said, look, China is realizing we were wrong by not making them proper stakeholders in the New World Order. We need to try to get them back on the script because they're seeing that they're not going to benefit. So we need to try to persuade them to come back online. So you have these different interesting things. Now, what I would say for our history is that the last time that this was done in a serious way, because this is not the first time that there's been an attempt at a one world government great reset with a eugenics religion for an elite to manage the human herd. This is not the first time it's been done. And in fact, over the last century, there were 3 other cases where this nearly happened. And instead of China and India being the ones who saved the world, which is the case in the current situation, it was previously American patriots around people like Warren Harding, who worked very, very, very hard. They were courageous fighters. People like Senator George Norris, Senator Lafayette, leading figures from both political parties in the 1920s were at war with this Anglo-American deep state penetration running a 5th column inside of the United States itself, and who were behind the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was originally the first attempt at a one world government, right? And
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the League of Nations was started by a South African, Jan Smuts.
Jan Smuts, that's right. And Jan Smuts was a direct participant in the Alfred Milner Roundtable movement that had set itself up utilizing the massive funds bequeathed to a trust by Cecil Rhodes when he died to carry out the will and the last will and testament, which was the governing manifesto of the Cecil Rhodes fortunes. to create a global secret society to discipline the civil service of the empire, with the focus on restoring the grandeur of the British Empire at its peak. And this was being done when there was a time when there was an existential crisis amongst the British oligarchical inner elites, who were seeing that there was a new emergence of a new type of society premised around the ideals of the American Revolution, the ideal that everybody is made equal in the eyes of a creator and endowed with inalienable rights, out of which the consent of the governed gives authenticity and authority to law. And the economic expression of that in the material world was seen in the form of vast increases in technological progress, the leaping over of limits to growth throughout the 19th century. This was driven by the Abraham Lincoln networks that had formerly been in the Whig Party of the United States, where two Whig presidents, the only two Whig presidents before Lincoln's murder, were both murdered. I say murdered. People say, oh, they died of poisoning. No, it's or food poisoning or something, or eating too many cherries and cold milk in the case of Zachary Taylor. No, they were killed, and they were both enacting the exact same policy of constitutional banking, working on a foreign policy that was premised around cooperation with your neighbors and in opposition to the structures of Wall Street and the British East India Company's minions around the world internationally. So Lincoln, after he dies, he still has many collaborators who are fighting in high positions of influence within the Congress, within the Senate, within even elements of the executive branch. They organize themselves around Garfield, who ends up getting assassinated as well by a British-directed assassination operation in 1880, a few months before the assassination of Alexander II, the Tsar who saved America during the Civil War, by a London-directed anarchist outfit that kills him. You have the same thing with McKinley, killed by an anarchist terrorist cell, which is run by Emma Goldman, a person who is arrested and then is taken out of her bail is paid for by Bertrand Russell in 1902 after killing McKinley, where she runs a synthetic cult of ideological anarchist terrorists in the United States, one of whom is deployed as a Polish idiot, a disposable idiot, to kill McKinley, who's trying to revive the Lincoln policies. And what are the and she's bailed out by Bertrand Russell. Both of them are members of the Neo-Malthusian League. The Neo-Malthusian League is the inner echelon priesthood of empire that has tried to organize society around the Malthusian law of overpopulation, and that all elites are responsible to manage the herd, the animals called humans, before they become too numerous, utilizing the gifts nature has given of controlled pandemics, controlled wars, controlled starvations, famines. They did that in Ireland. They did that in India. And we saw, a certain, like I said, there was an existential crisis because the system of Lincoln, despite the assassinations, was still spreading. And nations like Russia in the 1890s, France in the 1890s, Germany, Japan, increasingly China under its 100 days of renewal, of reform in the 1890s, were all embarking and adopting this new way of thinking of an anti-Malthusian world order founded upon national banking, national protectionism, national sovereign controls of your destiny, which is the expression of the interests of the people and the will of the people. Populism, in the best sense of the term. That was spreading internationally with rail development projects like electricity grids, electrification being applied for civilian use, railroads to create interconnectivity, and to liberate nations from dependency upon British-controlled shipping routes, which is how this tiny island, right? That's a big paradox for some people. And I'm doing all this for context so that we have a stage set where we'll see the actors from China, from America play a role. And especially the League of Nations, right? To understand what is the League of Nations, what was Jan Smuts actually a part of, what was this roundtable? So the existential crisis was that, the empire realized, well, they're not able to hang on. People are not playing their game anymore. And this one little island was able to control the world through their control of the City of London financial manipulations, obviously usury, speculation, getting nations to adopt free trade was a great way the empire was able to get nations to their target nations would be induced stupidly to say, okay, we won't have a national bank, we won't have protectionism, we'll just allow free trade. And that was great if you're a British East India Company or a fancier oligarchy that can, that can just rape and pillage and undermine your nation, or you have now free markets determining the value of commodities instead of actual production and actual human beings who need things in the real world. If you just have the markets, then all of a sudden opium becomes a source of value, which is what was done to destroy China in the case of the Opium Wars, right? The first and the second. And when the Chinese had leaders who said, no, we're not going to allow opium to continue to corrupt and destroy the soul of our people. Well, then you had British gunboats sent to enforce free trade as the law of the seas and pour it down their throats, which was really done in force, especially after the Second Opium War, that got Hong Kong to become the base of operations in Shanghai of British manipulation of China, which it had remained all the way until this very present day. It's still known as the MI6 of the Pacific. It always has been. Hong Kong. Shanghai to a certain degree as well. HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank of Commerce, was created at that time in 1865 in order to enforce and to help facilitate the international drug trade. So that was part of the century of humiliation. Britain had also not just been working at that time to destroy America through civil war, and I've written several books actually going into deep dives on how the British intelligence was behind the creation of the Civil War that exploded onto the scene in 1860. But they were also organizing a similar civil war in China itself in the 1850s into the 1860s, amidst the Opium War, the second Opium War. You had the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which was a synthetic pseudo-Christian cult organized by certain Jesuit-connected missionaries from Britain and the United States who had indoctrinated an idiot school teacher to become convinced that he was the brother of Jesus Christ, and he created a synthetic Christian cult of 30 million members that took control of 1/3 of the territory of China and tried to overthrow the Qing dynasty in the 18th. And it was because of the British support of this operation that the British were able to then say to the Qing amidst the Opium War that, look, unless you give up and declare yourself at the mercy of the British and give up on defending yourself during the Opium Wars, we will officially declare and recognize the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom as an independent sovereign entity of the legitimate rulers of China. And that was something that they put onto the bargaining chip, bringing the Qin delegates to the bargaining table and carving up, China in the form of Hong Kong and what have you. They were doing the same thing to the South as well, to Lincoln, saying like, look, we are going to recognize the Confederate South. That's what Lord Palmerston, Lord Gascoigne Cecil were also talking about doing, was recognizing the Confederate South as an independent sovereign country. And the only thing that stopped them, which would have also granted Britain the right to go and thus formally, openly assist militarily with the Confederate South, the only thing which stopped them was that Russia under Alexander II deployed the Russian Navy to New York and California as a direct message to the British oligarchs saying, look, if you do what you're threatening to do, it will be war with Russia. And that's what it bought the US a lot of space to do the proper battle and to put down the rebellion. So it worked where the better forces of humanity succeeded in stopping this divide to conquer strategy in America because of Russia and the US. The better forces failed in the case of China. So again, that's the part of the trauma of what affected the Chinese psyche. If you want to understand what has been shaping the subtle forces of the Chinese way of looking at the world, it's things like this. Their direct experience with having foreign directed intelligence agencies set up synthetic cults in their country to subvert them from within.